Mueller. Chris, fire away.
All right, thank you. How you doing, Tony?
Great, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. So we've seen a couple of special episodes of Dynamite this year, Fight for the Fallen and Fyter Fest. Is this sort of the alternative to doing monthly pay-per-views, and how often can we expect to see these special episodes going forward?
It's a really great question. It is in lieu of, oversaturating the pay-per-view market. I think we will be doing a lot of these special episodes of Dynamite. There's Fyter Fest, Fight for the Fallen. Blood and Guts was something we had planned and I expect to do in the future. There's going to be Beach Break in January, and there's more ahead in December. But Winter is Coming is the biggest Dynamite we've done, and I'm really excited about tomorrow night. But I think, you can expect a lot of really great cards on Dynamite in the months ahead. And I think it is something that really brings like a special pay-per-view feel to Dynamite. Like Dynamite, we always try to do big cards, whether it's a special branded show or not. But tomorrow night's card really does feel like as good of a pay-per-view card as you can do. It's been a challenge formatting the show, but I've really enjoyed it. I've had a good time doing it this week.
Thanks. Next question is from Dave Meltzer. Dave?
Hey, Tony, how you doing?
Great, Dave. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. I got a couple questions. I guess, can you reveal what spot on the show the Omega Moxley match will be? Will it be last? Will it be at the start of an hour or first or somewhere else?
It will be, sure. It will be last. It'll be the main event. And I'm going to format the show a little differently than I formatted it in the past. It's going to be more like a pay-per-view card, and there won't be – I think there's great promos on Dynamite, and some of the strongest segments on Dynamite this year have been promos, but this will be more like a pay-per-view where it's going to be structured around the big matches. And we have a huge card. A lot of the biggest wrestlers in AEW are going to participate in the Dynamite Diamond Battle Royal. Britt Baker and Layla Hirsch is a great match. Jericho and Kazarian is a great match, and anytime you have Jericho on the card, it's a huge drawing card. And then obviously we have this big Cody and Darby versus Hobbs and Starks tag with a big issue there. We're gonna have this big card, and what I've got it set up is if the main event were to run past 60 minutes, towards the 60-minute time limit, if we don't have 60 minutes left in the show when we get to the match, then TNT is going to stay with it as long as it takes. And we've got a 60-minute time limit on the match. If we haven't gotten to the match 60 minutes into the show, then I would say we're going to get the whole match in. I expect it'll be a great lengthy match. But I also think it's going to be an awesome main event, and we have a lot of big stuff planned on the show, and I'm trying to build it like a pay-per-view card. So that's the idea.
Is there anything new with Brody Lee, like a return or anything like that? Because he's kind of obviously been disappeared for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah. Well, I can't comment on him not being here, but I'm he's one of our top wrestlers, and we'll be excited to have him with us soon, I hope.
Anything else as far as I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is almost every week, or it seems like you sign one or two new people, and how many? I mean, given the limitations of the 2-hour TV, and I know you're getting the third hour, but how many people can you add without hardly ever subtracting? I mean, at some point, it just seems. I mean, you're really trying to load up, obviously, on a lot of unknown talent that shows potential on Dark. But what's kind of like your philosophy on everything right now? I mean, as far as being able to keep adding new people.
Well, I think we're all still in a pandemic, and there are probably some cuts I could have and would have made and have chosen not to, because I think it's a really difficult time for people in the wrestling business. And like I said, over 8 months ago, when we weren't letting people go, even though all of our live events had been postponed, I really feel strongly that it's really hard time to get work in the wrestling business right now. I don't want to be letting a lot of people go. And I do agree with what you're saying. We've built a really big roster. It's hard to use everybody, but at the same time, we do need to keep developing talents and bringing people in. That's where Dark has become valuable, and I've extended the length of Dark, and I'm seriously considering splitting Dark into multiple developmental shows, and possibly even having one that is more of a developmental show and one that is more established talent, or maybe a mix of the two. But definitely our streaming products have given us a good platform to feature a lot of the people we've added, and I believe in the people we're adding. We've added a lot of people that I really, really like to the card recently, and for me, it's really, really important to build stars for the future. Will Hobbs is in a prominent position in one of the top matches on this card, and Will Hobbs is somebody who came in working on Dark, and I got to know him as essentially, frankly, when he came in, the people on Dark, they're developmental talents, and they're sometimes in an enhancement type position. The first time I worked with Will Hobbs one-on-one at length personally was I was putting together for the Saturday Night Dynamite the Darby segment with Ricky, where Ricky came out half-painted as Darby. I wanted a big opponent for Darby, somebody that physically would overmatch him, because I think Darby is going to be fighting from underneath against pretty much anybody he's fighting, and I think it's better to have it be a big, strong, imposing person and build like a David Goliath type dynamic between him and his opponent. So that's how I first started working. Will was great in the match. I put the whole thing together with those guys. I love Will, and I got to know him, and then we were coming up on All Out and the Battle Royal. When I was putting that together, I decided I would feature Will in a prominent position. So working with talents on Dark, I think there's a great opportunity for people to become featured stars in the company. You can come up quick through this developmental path. And so we're trying to add a lot of people, trying to fish for stars. And if we find, a few stars, I think it's worth it to sign a good amount of people. There's a lot of acts I'm really excited about on Dark right now that I think have a potential to break out. Some of the tag teams we signed, Top Flight, have done really well on Dynamite now. And they had started out, with a couple of really good matches on Dark that impressed everybody. The Acclaimed is an act I put together with two guys that were featured on Dark separately. They had never been a tag team, and the Acclaimed is a gimmick, is a name I had kicked around for a long time. I thought it was a cool name, and honestly, when I saw these guys, I was like, they're the Acclaimed. They're exactly what I was looking for, the two of them, and I don't think either of them had ever thought about teaming. I think they told a funny story on the radio that that they both were coming for a meeting with me, and they were like, oh, that's cool, but they didn't know it was like the same meeting. And I think they have a ton of potential as a team. We're seeing a lot of other great talents coming up through Dark, and I think for us right now, it's more important to add and develop people than for me to worry about cutting the budget during the pandemic. Even though you're right, it's not sustainable to add people, and not let people go. But 2020 has been a different year, so I think I'm taking a different approach to it.
Thanks so much, Tony. Thanks, Dave. Next question is from Steve Argentaru, TSN. Steve?
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Tony. How you doing?
Really well, thanks.
Can you expand a little more on why you made the decision to have Moxley versus Omega this week as opposed to waiting for a pay-per-view? Just taking into account the quality of the match, is it just as simple as there were 3 months until the next pay-per-view, or was it something else that went into that decision?
There's more that went into it. I mean, the timing of the pay-per-views is by design. Like, I think it's really a great duration to have a few months between the big pay-per-view shows to reinforce that Dynamite is our core product. And the reason I want to put big matches on Dynamite is because Dynamite is the flagship product, the flagship revenue stream of AEW. It's the lifeblood of AEW. And there wouldn't be an AEW without Dynamite. I want people to feel like Wednesday nights they're going to get huge matches, and that really when the revenue model in wrestling changed, what made me get into the wrestling business, the reason I started AEW was when the revenue model of wrestling changed. I've always loved wrestling. My dream was to start a wrestling company, but I'm also not a sucker, and I'm not going to put a ton of money into a bottomless pit. But when the revenue stream for television weekly wrestling became so large potentially, when I saw the TV contracts that were going to be coming out, it was 2018, and I saw what was ahead for TV contracts, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. And now we've signed a $175 million 4-year contract, and that was the business plan of this company, was to get that contract, build the relationship we have with TNT, and put on huge main events and huge shows. So we've done a lot of huge matches on Dynamite. We've done a lot of big things on Dynamite. This is the biggest match we've ever done on Dynamite, to have our champion and our number one contender. And Mox has made other defenses on Dynamite against great wrestlers and great stars, but Kenny's the biggest star that Mox has defended against. And we've seen John, between TV and pay-per-view, take on Hager, Brody Lee, Darby Allin, MJF, and many other top stars here in AEW, and Eddie Kingston on this past pay-per-view, and Eddie Kingston on Dynamite too, and Lance Archer. And through all these great matches, whether on pay-per-view or Dynamite, John has continued to be a flagship great champion for our company. Kenny, since we started, has been established as one of our top stars. We did the Eliminator tournament to build to a huge main event match that I wanted to put out on Dynamite and build this show. Winter is Coming tomorrow night as kind of a flagship episode of Dynamite. We're building special events. I mean, Fyter Fest, there was a lot of anticipation for Fyter Fest this year. And then when we did Fight for the Fallen, people are excited. And then these are new traditions. This is year 2, but we're already establishing new traditions in wrestling. And I think, putting huge main events on Dynamite, I want people to believe that's the norm of what you're going to see on the show. I thought that when the TV contracts in wrestling became so large, frankly, then I started to think you should be putting the biggest matches on the TV, really, if you think about it. And so that's why this is no exception. I've tried to put a lot of the biggest matches on Dynamite, and I want people to feel like a spot on Dynamite sometimes is as good as a big pay-per-view spot, even though the pay-per-view cards we build are epic. And I only want to do these big 4 because I think that if you oversaturate, if you do, one a month or even more than one a month, especially, maybe it's not as special. And I think you can do big cards, but if I'm going to charge $50 a pop, I really want people to feel like those are the biggest collection of matches you can put on a card. This match we're going to have tomorrow with Kenny and Mox would be as big as anything we put on pay-per-view, and the card is a great pay-per-view card. It's a little bit shorter with a 2-hour show, especially with some breaks, compared to what we do with the pay-per-view, but that's the idea. So my long-winded answer to your question is that I will keep putting big matches on Dynamite like this, and that's been the spirit of doing big stuff. The Santana Ortiz and Best Friends parking lot fight, I didn't put them on All Out because I was building to a huge match on Dynamite. Starks and Darby, I didn't put that match on All Out again because I was building to something really big on Dynamite. So I just want people to watch Dynamite. Really, it's really important. And we have, again, the big 4 pay-per-views, and Revolution's our next big pay-per-view, and Revolution 2 is going to be stacked, and we're all up for the challenge of trying to live up to the original Revolution. But now is the time to do this match. It's going to be awesome on Dynamite because, frankly, I don't have a bigger platform to put something than Dynamite. It's the most important thing to us.
Thanks, Tony. Next up is Dave LaGreca. Dave?
Thanks for the time today.
Yeah, Dave, it's good to hear from you. How are you?
Good, man. And you just mentioned that being involved in pro wrestling has always been a dream of yours. Has it been more difficult or less difficult than you thought it was going to be?
It's a cop-out, but I would say it's a mix of the two. There's some things that are probably harder and some things that aren't as bad as you think. A lot of times when you start out with anything, people are going to try and convince you shouldn't do it, and you'd be better off leaving it to the professionals. But now I've been doing it for a while, and people can criticize as much as they want, but frankly, there probably aren't a lot of people who have more experience writing a wrestling show or dealing with a network on behalf of a wrestling show or managing a wrestling company. So I've definitely learned a lot on the job. There were things I was nervous about coming in that are probably easier than I thought, and there's parts that are harder too. And on the human side, it is hard. And some of the stuff the other Dave brought up earlier, I haven't had to let a ton of people go yet. At least I shouldn't say I haven't let a lot of people go yet, because again, I think there probably would have been made sense to contract the roster a little bit. While we were adding a lot of people, you probably have some spots opening up where you don't necessarily need everybody, but it just wasn't the right time to do that. So for me, that part of it I haven't had to face as much yet, but that's always hard in any business. And being the GM of a Premier League team and managing that roster and working in the NFL for many years, I've had to deal with that too, but that's never fun. And in general, I'd probably say it's a mix of the two. And every day there's stuff I never even thought about that's a new challenge, but then there's other things I thought would be really awful that are pretty fun, actually.
Thanks. Next up is Connor Casey. Connor?
Hey, Tony. Appreciate you doing this today.
Hey, Connor.
First question. The Bucks have mentioned in previous interviews that they didn't necessarily want to win the tag titles quite yet and that you pushed for it to happen at Full Gear. When you look back at AEW's first year, do you feel maybe there was an overcorrection in how the Elite was positioned on the card for the first full year of television?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if the guys needed to get the hell beaten out of them to end the year the way we did, but I definitely think this past year, was the right way to do it. I think we built a lot of strong wrestlers outside of just the Elite. I mean, we came in with the Elite as huge names, but I don't think it was an overcorrection, but I definitely think this was the year for the guys to be booked stronger. Kenny and Hangman had one of the greatest tag runs I've ever seen anybody have, and now the Young Bucks I expect to have a great run too, hopefully. And the Young Bucks were prominently positioned. Kenny was prominently positioned. Hangman prominently positioned from the beginning. So, no, I don't think it was. I think it was an effort to showcase a lot of other people and build strong wrestlers like Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, Darby Allin, and Pac, all of whom were really prominently positioned through the end of 2019 and then into 2020, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Okay, next up we have Sean Radican. Sean.
Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm good, Sean. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. A couple questions. You've built up Boxley defending the AEW World Championship against Kenny Omega in a short amount of time, but they've got a lot of history going back, with Moxley's debut and the attack leading to their unsanctioned match. And now this time it seemed like it started with both guys wanting a wrestling match, but it's gotten really personal. We've seen more of the condescending Omega in promos. Can you talk about transitioning Omega back into this prominent position? Not that he's not a top star, but can you talk about, moving him, through the tournament and, into the special so quickly? And, it seemed to also really brought out something in Moxley as well, which I want you to touch on when you said, I love this, during this promo. You could tell, I think both guys are fired up. Can you talk about, not only the quick turnaround, but the passion these two are showing, leading into this match tomorrow night?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's, it hasn't been, I think the build has been there the whole time. They wrestled at Full Gear with a great build up to that started at our first ever show. Really the big, going back to the first show we ever did, Double or Nothing 2019, we've been building up this Kenny Mox main event. The one time they have wrestled was in this unsanctioned death match where it was not even a match that counted in the records in our story. So there's a lot of tension. And then John's had this amazing run and is having this amazing run. And now Kenny has also had an amazing run this year and is on an amazing run himself. Kenny had this transition. I think this year, he was a very prominent person in AEW. Here's a fact. Kenny's been involved so much on Dynamite this year. He's one of the winningest wrestlers in AEW. A lot of people don't know this. Kenny and I are the only two people that have been at every AEW show ever. But he's been at everything we've ever taped, every show we've ever done. He and I are the only two people that you could say that about. And he's, been involved in behind the scenes a lot, but on the show, I think Kenny's prominently been featured as one of our top stars, top ratings draws. So I don't think there's anything different other than the fact that most of the year he's been wrestling in the top tag team matches, which we position as big main event matches. Kenny and Hangman wrestled in some of the biggest matches this year as a tag team in the Stadium Stampede. Kenny and Matt Hardy were in the street fight against Jericho and Sammy that really teed up the Stadium Stampede. And Kenny's had other huge matches like the Iron Man match earlier in the year with Pac. Is a great singles match. And, of course, into the Eliminator. The Eliminator tournament was part of the build to a championship match because, the Eliminator tournament, the winner of this tournament is going to be positioned as the next challenger, effectively. And coming out of that, well, when Kenny won the Eliminator tournament and John beat Eddie Kingston, well, Kenny and John have so much history. You couldn't ask for a more credible number one contender than Kenny, who's undefeated in singles matches this year, even though most of the matches he's wrestled in were tag matches. And so, yeah, it's brought a great fire out of both guys, but both guys have been bringing fire all year too. But this is definitely special. It's the biggest match for either guy, and it's the biggest match for AEW all year. So that's why I felt really good about putting it on a Dynamite in December. And, this is going to be a really hot match, and I think the rest of the year is going to be really hot. And for me, I just think that, you asked me to touch on John and his intensity. John's the best champion in wrestling, and this is John's biggest match yet. And it's very fitting that we're doing this on a special Dynamite. For all of you guys to be here, some of the most prominent people in the wrestling media, for all of us to be together talking about it, I think shows how important of a match it is and how important of a show this is tomorrow. So I think this is working, building up the Mox and Kenny, and it had both guys wanting a serious wrestling match, but as so often happens in wrestling, things did get pretty personal pretty quickly, but not. I think it was the perfect amount of time between Full Gear and Winter is Coming. I think it's so. I'm very excited about it, man. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Tony. One other question. Last week, the segments on Dynamite were just, it was hard to take your eyes away. You went from one segment to the other. At one point, Sheeta had a really strong promo ahead of her match. Can you talk about building the pacing of the show? And is that an effort to keep people's eyeball? Is it, just what you were doing last week? Were you just trying to really drive home? You got to watch next week, and it's going to be hard to take your eyes away, because even on a show that's building towards a big show like Winter is Coming, it was hard to, it was so engrossing last week. I just want you to talk about formatting the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. A lot of thought goes into it. I work hard on it every week. The weeks of tape shows, I have a little bit more flexibility because last week's show was taped. So I can play around with things in editing as far as moving segments around if anything runs heavy, or if I need to trim a segment or postpone a segment or move a segment back. But the show went to plan really well, and I didn't have to do a lot of that last week. It was throwing stuff against the wall early, and there was stuff I did in October, November, December of last year formatting the show that I, now smack myself in the head and think, what were you thinking last year? But that's where the benefit of doing this for a year has really paid off. A lot of thought goes into it. I try and put exciting stuff into the show, and I think there's things that appeal to everybody. What's great about Dynamite is most weeks when I talk to different people, it's not just one segment people really like. You could talk to 10 people and they might tell you 8, 9, 10 different things in the show that they liked between them. So I, in terms of formatting, I try to, keep some consistency, but on the other hand, change things up. You don't want too much pre-tape content necessarily without some action in a segment. So I do try to keep the action in, but there's times where you can't avoid it. There's times where a long match, because of a long match, you need to, there's a certain number of breaks you need to get in. So point being, it depends on the card week to week, how strong it is, how many big stars you have, and then how many talking segments you have, how many angles you have to get across. You can't necessarily cover, you can't cover every story in AEW with just the matches on Dynamite. So you have to find other ways to get certain stories on the show. And I think, I'm always trying to do a better job of that. And I think, like I said, in the second year, I think it's been a lot better. There are things I put on the format last year, or things, really honestly, there are things people asked me to put on the format last year, and I said, yeah, sure. And I learned in 2019, like, no, you shouldn't have said yes. And so I'm, I think I'm trying to do a better job editing the format week to week. I try to do a better job putting it together week to week. And then if people give me ideas, I think I've learned with experience what you should and shouldn't put in. Because like I've told you guys before, I get pitched like hundreds of ideas every week, and you can't do them all. And sometimes there's good ones that you can't do, and you want to months down the line. But just trying to manage, trying to fit as much good stuff as you can in one show is really challenging. I'm glad you asked about it, because tomorrow's show is one of the most challenging formats I've ever put together. But I think the show is going to be great. You might ask me questions about why it was paced the way it was asked after, and I can explain them. But I think it's going to be awesome, and you're not going to see more good wrestling in a 2-hour wrestling show than you will tomorrow, I expect. I mean, you never know on a live TV, but I think it's going to be a great show.
Thanks, Tony. Next up is Stephanie Chase. Stephanie?
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm really well, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. It's great to speak to you again. So we've seen Mike. Oh, thanks, Tony. We've seen Mike Tyson in AEW. We've recently seen a tease of Shaq, and these are names that can really bring more eyes and mainstream attention onto AEW and see all the great work you're doing. But as someone who grew up as a wrestling fan and now has their own company, is it part of your mission to see wrestling get better mainstream respect and appreciation than it does? And also, with the work you do with football and soccer, do you think that status you have makes it easier when you're advocating for wrestling to those in media who maybe wouldn't accept it as much?
Yeah, that's definitely how there became an AEW. I think for years people wanted, to bring pro wrestling back to major cable television, other than the one company that had shows on major cable television. And, we provided that alternative, and more so than an alternative, we provided a mainstream wrestling solution for people, not just older people either. I mean, we have this really young audience that's the youngest big audience in wrestling, and week to week, there are all these viewing figures that have our network doing backflips. So that is all possible because of the National Football League and the Premier League, and because of my dad. He put me in this position to work in these leagues, and then some dumb luck. I made really awesome, talented, powerful friends in Hollywood over the years, and I was in a position to make those friends again because of my dad's connections in the NFL and the Premier League, and that's why people would probably take me seriously. But some of it just comes down to dumb luck. I mean, Bernie, my friend and partner in activist artist management, we became friends sitting next to each other on a flight from Dallas to Los Angeles almost 6 years ago. And it was a very random happening, and stayed in touch, and then became really good friends, and then became business partners together. And he introduced me to Kevin Riley, who's been the president of TNT and TBS. And Kevin opened the door for us to have this opportunity, and then we built a relationship with Brett White's the general manager of TNT, Sam Linsky, the executive vice president of TNT and TBS, and they've been really, really generous to us, and we're expanding this relationship, growing it. It's a long-term plan, and bringing wrestling back to TNT is really important to me. And tomorrow night's show, I really hope people remember, as there's been a lot of great wrestling shows on TNT, and a lot of them have been Dynamites, but they're not all Dynamites. I really hope people remember tomorrow's show as one of the best wrestling shows ever on TNT, and I hope people remember it as one of the best Dynamites, maybe the best Dynamite. It's not, I know the pandemic is still going on, and it's all hanging over everybody's head, and it's terrible. In terms of the presentation of wrestling, that is like the least of anyone's concerns of how it affected the pandemic. But among wrestling fans, it was definitely a topic of conversation, was like, it's changed the way people watch wrestling. It's changed the way wrestling is presented. There are going to be about 1,000 people in the stands for this show, and that's a legitimate crowd. And it's done the right way. don't worry that, you're seeing 1,000 people packed like sardines in some tight indoor space. We've got an open air venue. It's outdoor stadium and Daly's Place Amphitheater. We've got everyone spaced out in pods. There's no seating on top of each other. We enforce people wearing masks. I've tried to keep it as safe as possible. And we've been doing this for several months, and people are really enjoying it, and we haven't had any problems or people having issues with this. And so I'm glad it's working well, and there's going to be a real crowd for this. So if you haven't watched wrestling in the pandemic, if there's somebody out there that's like, I can't do it without the crowd, there's a crowd. There's 1,000 people coming. That's a legit wrestling crowd. A lot of the great shows you've seen in wrestling had about that many people there, whether it was ECW One Night Stand or a lot of the great ECW shows or a lot of other great pay-per-views that we've seen over the years, sometimes less than that. So that's a real wrestling crowd, and this is going to be a real great show. So I'm just really happy to have that aspect of it back too, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Next up is Mike Beauvais from TSN. Mike?
Hey, Tony. How you doing?
Good. By the way, I'm sorry, Mike. Stephanie, if I didn't do a good job answering your question, we can come back around. I hope I didn't trip over the answer. Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to. So, yeah, Mike. But anyway, so Stephanie, if you have a follow-up or if I missed something in that, please feel free. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Two cool questions for you. Firstly, there's been a lot of speculation online, so I'll just ask, is Jon Moxley going to work Wrestle Kingdom? And secondly, we saw the return sorry? No, okay. Secondly, we saw the return of Death Triangle last week. We saw Will Hobbs join Team Taz. Is there talk about introducing a Trios Championship?
Yes, there is, but it won't be in 2020. It will be, if it happens, it would most likely be in 2021. I am seriously thinking about it. I think there's a lot of momentum for it. We have a lot of great trios teams. I would like to get through 2020. I'd like to get into Beach Break and moving towards Revolution, but I definitely think it is something on my agenda, yeah. And it's something I've been talking about for a long time and thinking about. So those are both great questions.
Thanks. Next up is Mike Johnson. Mike.
Hey, Tony.
Unmuted.
Hey, Tony. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, Mike. How are you, man?
I'm good. So the title of tomorrow's show is Winter is Coming. Can you give us some background as to why this name was used for Dynamite? Like, are White Walkers showing up? Like, what's going on here? Like, there's always a reason for what you do. What's the reasoning here?
I wanted to do a very special episode of Dynamite. I wanted to build a brand, like,
Muted.
special, like what we've done with Fyter Fest, Fight for the Fallen, our anniversary show, and have a big, monumental Dynamite event. And this was perfect to me. It would say that, it's got this big fight feel. It's an epic meaning. I'll be 100% honest with you guys, and I hope this doesn't hurt the performance of the show. I've never watched Game of Thrones. I don't know anything about it, but I know Winter is Coming. I know it's a huge expression. My mother is obsessed with Game of Thrones. My father, by osmosis from sitting in the room with my mom, he says it. He doesn't even watch. He's not watching. He's working, but he knows what Winter is Coming is. Everyone knows it, and it sounds awesome, whether you're a huge fan of the show or not. I just don't have as much time between Fulham and AEW and the Jags to watch shows as I used to, so it's hard to get into new ones. I find myself watching the same shows when they're on as I have for 15, 20 years, South Park, Always Sunny, and Curb Your Enthusiasm. So for me, I thought it would be an awesome name, but also what it does, it's the beginning of winter. It's December. We're into December now. Tomorrow, it's true, winter is coming for all of us here, and it just feels big. It feels like an epic fight. And frankly, with my partnership with Warner Media, I've got this friendly partner, and it's their trademark, and they didn't have to let me use it, but they were awesome. I asked permission, and they gave me permission to use it. So you can't beat that, and that's why you want to be media partners with a giant company like Warner that has all these awesome trademarks and all this awesome IP that you can ask them to potentially utilize, and cross your fingers that they're going to let you do it. So there's that. And then there's more ahead in December. I mean, Winter is Coming is going to be huge, but I'm also planning a big Christmas event and a big New Year's event. and then beach breaks ahead. So winter is coming, but there's a lot ahead in the winter as we are on the road to Revolution, and so that is why.
Got it. Stephanie Chase, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, thank you for answering my first question, Tony. It was a great answer. And I just had a follow-up one that's more of a bit of a selfish one because I'm from the UK. But given the stats we saw recently about the UK viewership of Dynamite and how well it's doing over here, have you had any talks with ITV about airing Dynamite live or any strategies to increase AEW in the UK next year alongside doing shows whenever that's possible?
It's a great partnership with ITV. I have had talks about them. I mean, we're going to continue with that partnership. I would like to increase our viewership. At this point, for live viewing, AEW Plus has done very well for us. We built a great international revenue stream with AEW Plus. I think it's very affordable. It also eliminates the commercials. And the AEW Plus version of Dynamite is the completest version of the show. I think for me, look, I'm not condoning tape trading of AEW, but I was a tape trader, and I know that I would have wanted to get the international version of Dynamite to have the uninterrupted version of some of the big matches that have had breaks in them that I can't help because that's how we, function here, and that's the revenue that pays all of us, the wrestlers and everybody. So for me, AEW Plus, I think is a great product. It's very affordable, and it's a couple bucks a week and then $5 a month. It's hard to beat. So I definitely think, AEW Plus, so I'll look to continue that service, and AEW on ITV will continue. That's actually my first TV deal, and I hold it very near and dear to my heart. And when I was planning this, the first conversation I had was with Kevin, but TNT really put me through the paces for over a year before I had a deal. When we started talking, I had to go out and prove it, and I took the biggest gamble anybody's ever taken in this business, I believe. I went out and signed tens of millions of dollars of wrestlers at the beginning of 2019 in January, and not all at once, but over 3, 4, 5 years, committing millions of dollars across a huge roster that I built, and committed all this without having any American TV revenue under contract, but knowing I would get it. And knowing I had this great relationship with TNT, but they also wanted to see me do and prove what I said I could do, which is sign all these big stars and build a roster and build a brand. So we were deep in talks, but I still had to pony up the cash and take the gamble with no commitment. But what I did have was ITV had said they would work with us in England and put the show on, which is so huge. And Stephanie, and for people who haven't traveled to England or spent time there, it's a massive network. Like the biggest networks here, where we broadcast NFL football games that are available to everybody in the country free of charge. And so you couldn't ask for a bigger or better TV partner than ITV. They have a great history of wrestling going back to World of Sport, and that was my pitch to them in the summer of 2018, was that really, hey guys, World of Sport had been under the entertainment division. Fulham in the Premier League, I have great connections thanks to my chief executive at Fulham, who I work really closely with on a daily basis because, he's the chief executive and I'm the director of football, and we build a team together along with our head coach and our management staff. And so I have great relationships in England, and Alistair had a great relationship with Niall, who was the head of sport at ITV. So my pitch was, instead of with the entertainment division running this, what if we work together with the sport division to put on a wrestling show? You guys have great history with World of Sport. I think it's where a wrestling fan would want to watch a wrestling show, just like TNT in America. I think is a channel where a wrestling fan is conditioned. Like, this is a good wrestling channel. It's a great, great channel. And so anyway, I'm not sure about more show times on ITV or a live airing of the show, but I do really like AEW Plus. I think it's done very well for us in lieu of having live TV, and I think the slots we have on ITV and ITV4 are great for us also. And when I've been in England, it's really neat being able to watch the show on ITV. I never get over it. So thank you for asking that.
Thanks. Next up is Connor Casey. Connor.
Hey, Tony, just had one more question for you. One of the big things people have been getting really excited about lately is seeing Kenny bring back shades of his cleaner persona from his New Japan days. Was that something you and him talked about slowly reintroducing, or was it something he really wanted to bring back into the equation?
Something we talked about reintroducing, but it's something he definitely wanted to do. I love working with Kenny. This tournament, and we worked together on it, and a lot of the stuff was his ideas, and then a lot of it's stuff I put into place, and we worked on it together, and that's how a lot of stuff in AEW is I collaborate with people. A lot of people have talked about it in the past, but I work with a lot of different people on a lot of different ideas, and I'll even work with people pretty far down the card on ideas. I was drinking White Claws in the middle of the night with Ricky Starks, and he said something about what it would be cool if I came out painted as Darby once, and I was like, "Well, we're going to do that. I have an idea for that. Well, I know when we can do it." And we did it, and it became a very memorable, great moment, and the way we did it was very cool too. And there's a lot of stuff like that, and I love working with people up and down the card, and we have a lot. And then the great thing about our EVPs is they are also working with people. They have great ideas. Not just singles people. The Young Bucks have worked with. Not just tag people. The Young Bucks have also worked with a lot of singles people and have come up with great ideas that we've done. And Kenny has great ideas, and I love working with Kenny, but Kenny has great ideas for other people too. And Cody, the waiting room, was Cody's idea for Britt, and I love it. And it's really fun. I mean, it's fun working on it with him, and he's come up with great ideas for it. And so with Kenny, he wanted to do this, and we talked about it, and we talked about this Eliminator tournament, which he talked about doing a tournament. And I love doing tournaments. I coined the Eliminator, which I'd used for really the way we set up the championships in 2019. I also used the word Eliminator because it's used in boxing, and it's a credible sports tournament. It's how you explain a contender for a big fight getting set up, and it's how somebody becomes a logical number one contender. And in Kenny's case, when he won, he was also just a logical number one contender, not just because he won the Eliminator, but also with his undefeated record and his stature in the world of wrestling. So it was something he wanted to do. I love the idea, and so yeah, it's why we're doing it. And this entrance and a lot of the presentation he's brought back were his ideas. And again, there's a lot of ideas that you just can't do, but these are ideas that I definitely wanted to do. And so I'm glad he brought it up. I'm glad he wanted to do it.
Thanks. Kenny McIntosh, do you have your hand up? Where, if you do, let us know.
I do.
Okay.
Hey, Tony, how's it going?
Good. Hey, Ken.
Hey, how's it going? I just wanted to ask you a quick question about tomorrow. Obviously, it's a huge show. You talked all about the big matches. But I wanted to ask you about Miro. He's going to be in the Battle Royal tomorrow. But, I mean, there has been a lot of talk about Miro over the years. People want to see him as a top guy. He's been in the team with Kip Sabian so far. Can you just talk about the kind of long-term strategy for Miro? Because it feels like
Miro's going to be huge here. It's very hard for somebody to come in. I'm really glad you asked, Ken. Miro's going to be a big star here. It's really hard for people to come into AEW when you have a ranking system, unless they come in at the beginning of a new year cycle, and I didn't want to wait till January to bring Miro in. Brian Cage was the exception to this because Brian Cage, I booked, he came in, I signed Brian in January and had the plan that I was going to do the casino ladder match, and Brian would be a surprise, and we would build to Brian getting the shot, but then build up a record for Brian before we did Moxley versus Brian Cage. But I can't do that for everybody, and I wasn't going to do that again. And so I couldn't just put Miro in the main event with no record and no history here. So he's got to build up and build stories, but he's working with some of the top people in AEW, some of the people I regard as the top people with the Best Friends and now Orange Cassidy and stories. And so, we have great stuff going on the top of the card, and I just couldn't cast everybody aside. John Moxley and Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho and MJF, Cody and Darby, Ricky Starks and Brian Cage. We have Will Hobbs moving up now. Hangman. There's so many great things going on in AEW. And Miro is now going to be a huge part of AEW too, but just like everyone else, he had to win matches and get involved in stories. And whether people know it or not, we're recontextualizing Miro. I don't know what Miro was supposed to be before he came to AEW. I don't understand what he represented. And I think most of the great characters in wrestling have some element of their personality. There are exceptions to this, but where they bring themselves into it. And the Miro you're seeing is the Miro I know, which is an awesome, interesting person who's got an amazing sense of humor. I wanted to do that one-on-one thing with Miro and Trent because I did see some of what people were saying, because there's like a person in there that I was trying to show everybody that it's him. You know, it's not anything we made up at AEW, because it's not like, you know, it's not some great invention of a character. This is him. And I want people to get to know him better. And so with the Miro and Trent one-on-one video with Excalibur, I'd like to do more stuff like that and just show people ahead of a match, like what they think of each other and what their relationship is with each other, because there's a relationship between the two guys that I think we'll talk more about and touch more on, but it goes back a long time, and I think it helped helped the presentation of that match. I thought it helped the enjoyment of the match. For me, I thought it made it a better match, and I think for the story, you know, you want to get to know more about Miro, and for me, as you get to know more of him and see more of him, I think there's a bigger chance of Miro becoming a big crossover star in multimedia, and this includes gaming, which is such a big interest of his. And I think it's more likely it'll happen, but I'm just kind of rebuilding him, to be honest with you. I thought he got beaten down so bad. I saw some jackass on Twitter was like, this guy drove a tank at WrestleMania, and now he's doing this. And I was like, yeah, and then he got kicked in the nuts, and they treated him like shit for years. And you drove a tank out 5 years ago. That's not the guy I signed. And the guy I signed had been abused for years, and he's being rebuilt. He's going to be a huge star in wrestling, and he is a huge star. He's a huge name in wrestling now, but he wasn't treated like it for a long time. And you know, you're gonna get to know him better, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so when 2021 resets, I think he's going to be somebody that'll have a chance to build a record over the course of the year and be a big star here. But I wasn't just going to put a guy in with a 0-0 record and say he's the number one contender. That's not how it works. You know, Kenny had to work really hard to put himself in this position. There are exceptions, like Eddie and Moxley. They had a great story, and I had a great out to explain it, which is Mox wanted this match. He's defended against all the top 5 guys, and there's literally nobody in the top 5 Mox hadn't beaten. And so it's, you know, at that point, because Kenny was still coming up from tag teams, he hadn't wrestled as many singles matches. He was working his way through this eliminator. So we had a top 5 where Mox had literally beaten all of them. And Eddie was a match he wanted, and he was going to face the winner of the eliminator. So it's like, if he wants to do a voluntary title match and it's a big match and it's going to sell pay-per-views, I'll take it. So, but does that make sense, Kenny? I hope.
I think he's muted, but we just have time for one more question. Mike Johnson, final question.
Unmuted.
Well, I was going to ask about Miro, so Kenny jumped in on me. So I will ask this. You brought up Twitter. You got some heat from some people because of a tweet a couple of weeks ago, and AEW has been very progressive in the use of social media in building the entire foundation of the company. So when you see
did I get heat or did I get buzzed? Because let me ask you this: we did our biggest the next week we did our biggest rating of the pandemic, our tied for our second highest rating of the year. The week after I promised people the balance of power was shifting. We had, we're coming off the holiday this past week where we were still number 1, 18 to 49 male TV show, and we were, number 7 on television during the holiday weekend. I was very happy with how we did yesterday.
All right, I'll hit you with an Obi-Wan Kenobi quote. Okay.
So I will say this, Mike. I was 100% right in what I said, and whether it got heat or not, that's not the point, because heat draws in wrestling, and people wanted to see what's going on. And I was right about the balance of power shifting, and people are going to see tomorrow that I'm right. And they'll see Thursday that I'm right when the numbers come in for this. So, I said what I said for a reason. And, winter is coming in wrestling. And the other key thing is the balance of power was shifting in AEW storyline-wise, you could say. But frankly, the reason the balance of power in wrestling is shifting is it's shifting to you, and it's shifting to all of you people and all of the fans. Wrestling is becoming more about the fans than it's ever been before. The fans are getting to see more of what they wanted in wrestling than ever before. I'm willing to work with different people, different companies, and things are going to change. And there's going to be a big change. There's already been a lot of changes in wrestling in the past 18 months, in the past year, and there's going to be more. And that's why I said that. And I think if people want to see what's going to happen, and they should stay tuned. They should tune in tomorrow night. But I think there's a difference between heat and buzz. And if it was heat, then it was a good kind of heat because it definitely drew big the next week.
Thanks, Tony.
But anyway, Mike, I didn't mean to jump. But I'm sorry.
Unmuted.
Was there more to it than that, or were you just trying to ask me what I thought?
No, I was asking you about your thoughts on the reaction to the tweet, and then, is it kind of a double-edged sword since so much of the company has been built on social media buzz from the day the Bucks revealed the revelation that there was going to be an AEW on Being the Elite. Do you take it more to heart when you do see a negative feedback versus, oh, it's just some fan that's a yahoo running with the mouth?
No, I don't see negative. I
actually
felt really good about that because then that was in one show. I think we show people PAX back. And then, over the coming weeks, there's going to be a lot more great stuff I've established to people. And then we went out and did a 0.37 in the demo. And like I said, our, biggest audience of the pandemic, tied with the show after All Out for our biggest demo. And I think overall third biggest audience of the year. So I was very happy with, how that came out. So it's like, I can't really open my mouth without upsetting some fans. So I think I'd rather worry about the people we can please. And, in this case, I thought the reaction, was exactly what I wanted because we did a huge number the next week. And I expect we'll do a really big number tomorrow. And I'm hoping and expecting that. But I want people to know I am aiming for the top. I have great ambition here. It's very, very difficult to come from where we came from to be a startup, a true startup company, and be competing at the level we're competing at in media, on television, and in wrestling. And I'm really happy with where we're at. And when I say the balance of power is shifting, like I said, it's shifting to you people. It's shifting to the fans. And you're going to get to see more of what you want to see in wrestling, I promise, because there's been stuff you've wanted to see for years, and you haven't been able to see it, and we're going to do it. And I can't say all of what it is yet, but it's all going to be really cool. So that's it, and that's why I wanted to say that. And I just don't think if you don't get the reaction you want to something right away, it could mean multiple things. Like if you put all your cards on the table and people don't like it, then that's a bad sign. That means that you put your cards on the table, you showed them what you had, and it wasn't good enough. And in this case, that's not what happened because people saw the first card of a series, and I think they assumed that's the whole series. But it's also really important for me that people know that Pac is a huge star here. And I think that his return was the first of some really, really exciting moments that are going to happen here.